Boldwood presents Double Cross, written by Stephanie Harte, and read by Gemma Lawrence and Chris Simmons. Chapter 1. Daisy. Friday the 9th of January. The unexpected sound of my mobile ringing startled me, waking me from my sleep. I opened my eyes and blinked several times as I tried to adjust to the darkness before I stretched my arm over to the bedside cabinet and picked up the handset. Mum's name was illuminated on the screen. That couldn't be a good sign. Something must have happened. She was hardly likely to call me in the early hours of the morning for a casual chat. "Hello?" I said. My voice was husky from the booze and fags I'd had before I went to bed, so I coughed to clear my throat. "Daisy, you need to come to the hospital right away. Your dad's taken a turn for the worse." Mum didn't attempt to hide her panic. My heart started pounding in my chest. "Oh no, I'll be with you as soon as I can, but I'm in Kent." "What the hell are you doing in Kent?" I opened my mouth to reply, but Mum steamrolled on before the words had time to leave my lips. "You had no business leaving the hospital. You should have stayed by your dad's bedside. Your selfishness astounds me," Mum shouted before she slammed the phone down on me. When the call disconnected, I glanced at the screen. It was 2:45 in the morning. Even though I'd had good reason to desert my post, Mum found my absence unforgivable, and she was stubborn to the last, so no amount of grovelling or sucking up was going to help. Not that she'd given me an opportunity to apologise. Mum was gunning for me, so it wouldn't have mattered what I'd said. The call left me shell-shocked, momentarily dazed. I needed to act fast, but it was as though I'd been glued to the bed. Thoughts raced around in my head as I scrambled out from the warmth of the quilt. The temperature had dropped since I'd gone to bed, so I shivered as I threw off my pyjamas and pulled on a pair of skinny jeans and a hoodie. I was up to my neck in shit. I didn't know what to do for the best. Mum didn't realise I'd rescued Lily, and my twin sister had no idea that our dad had been brutally attacked by the scumbag he owed money to, Warren Jenkins. My intentions had come from a good place. I wasn't sure Mum or Lily would see it like that when they realised I'd been keeping them both in the dark. In my defence, Lily was still trying to come to terms with the ordeal of being kidnapped. She already had too much on her plate without worrying herself sick about Dad. Mum was doing enough of that for all of us. She was so preoccupied with him fighting for his life to notice anything going on around her, so I'd taken advantage of that. I'd done a cowardly thing and buried my head in the sand. Even though I knew I was being deceitful, I wasn't going to beat myself up over it. I'd done what I thought was right. It was a judgment call. A sudden knock on the bedroom door interrupted my train of thought. "I'm sorry to come bursting in on you, but I heard the phone ring," Bernice said as she pushed the door open. "Is everything okay?" Bernice Allen had been looking out for me from the first moment she'd met me. She had my back. She had my respect. I didn't want to burden her with my problems, but she had a knack of coaxing things out of me. "You know you can tell me anything, don't you?" A worried look was carved into Bernice's features. I bit down on my lip. Tears began stabbing my eyes, threatening to fall. "What's wrong, darling?" Bernice reached for my hand as she crossed the room. "Is it your dad?" I nodded my head. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Emotions had welled up inside me, and it was all I could do to hold them in. It wouldn't take much for the floodgates to truly open. "Has he passed away?" Bernice's blue eyes bored into mine. My silence made her jump to conclusions as she tried to piece the puzzle together and fill in the blanks. I forced myself to find my voice and set the record straight. "No, but he's not doing good. He's gone downhill. Mum wants me to get to the hospital straight away." "Oh no, that's awful. Give me a couple of minutes to get dressed and I'll drive you," Bernice said. "I can't ask you to do that. It's the middle of the night." and King's College Hospital is hours away from here. What sort of friend would I be if I let you go alone? It's not up for discussion. I'm going with you, Bernice insisted. To be honest, I was glad she'd taken charge of the situation. My head was all over the place. I wasn't in the right frame of mind to make a mercy dash to the hospital on my own. We'd better wake Lily. My heart sank. Tempted as I was to slip out of the house while she was sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger Dad was in, I knew that was the wrong thing to do. Bernice could sense my hesitation, so she started trying to talk some sense into me, but her words were having trouble getting through my thick skull. She's going to find out at some point. The longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be. Bernice was right. I had to come clean. Now that I'd been backed into a corner, I didn't really have another option. But I had a horrible feeling there wouldn't be a good outcome. Guilt wedged itself into my chest. I'd been counting the minutes, the hours, the days until this moment came. I've been dreading having to do this. I know you have, but it needs to happen. Don't look so worried. Everything will be all right. Bernice gave me a sympathetic smile. I wanted to believe what she'd just said, but Bernice didn't know my twin, Lily, like I did. My sister was highly strung, emotional, dramatic. She could turn on the waterworks in an instant. Whatever the occasion, she could find a reason to blub. And for once in her life, she had a very good reason. I couldn't dispute that. Chapter 2. Lily. My breath caught in my chest when I opened my eyes and saw the outline of two people hovering over me. I froze, heart pounding as I struggled to focus. For one horrible moment, I thought I was back in the warehouse with Smithy and Tank, the two heavies who'd been holding me against my will, in the bedroom on the mezzanine level. I could still picture it so clearly. Are you okay, Lily? The sound of Daisy's voice broke the spell and dragged me back to the present. Then I realised it was her and Bernice standing over me. Imagination was a powerful thing. The threat had felt real, but my mind was playing tricks on me. Shit, I'm sorry I scared you, Daisy said, with a guilty look on her face. That was an understatement if ever I heard one. I was absolutely terrified, even though I knew I wasn't in danger. I doubted I'd ever feel safe again. Daisy would be unimpressed by an emotional display, so I dug deep and kept a lid on things. I wanted to build bridges. I didn't want to do anything to piss my sister off. I clamped my lips shut and did what came naturally. Retreated into my shell. You've got to get up. We need to go to the hospital. Daisy's words had a sense of urgency about them. Why? What's the matter? I asked. Your dad's not well, Bernice piped up. Then she glanced sideways at Daisy, who met her gaze, and a silent exchange passed between them. I had the strangest feeling they were being economical with the details they were sharing and weren't telling me the full story. I wanted to quiz them more about it, but being woken from my sleep made me feel disoriented, and the opportunity passed before I had the chance when Daisy began to speak again. Mum wants us to get to King's College as soon as possible. We need to get on the road. It's a long way from here, Daisy said as she pulled back the quilt, exposing me to the cool night air. I wrapped my arms around myself in a bid to keep warm. The old house hadn't retained a scrap of heat since the boiler went off. What did Mum say? It must be serious for her to call you in the middle of the night. My question hung in the air between us. It was clear Daisy had no intention of answering it. She just stared at me with a weird look on her face. Can you stop the interrogation and get some clothes on? We need to get out of here, Daisy snapped. You don't need to bite my head off. Her abruptness took me by surprise. She was wearing her don't fuck with me face, so I wasn't brave enough to challenge her further. It didn't take much to push her buttons, and this wasn't the time to start a pointless argument. I could see Daisy wasn't going to fill in the blanks, no matter how much I wanted her to, so I threw my legs over the side of the bed and sat up. Bernice grabbed some trackies and a sweatshirt from the chest of drawers in the corner of the room and brought them over to me. I felt like I was in a trance as I put them on. As soon as I finished dressing, they herded me out the door. I'd barely fastened my seatbelt when Bernice's red Jag roared down the drive. Gravel sprayed from its tyres, which pelted up the sides of the car. Even the risk of damaging the shiny paintwork wasn't enough to make her take her foot off the accelerator. Anxiety coiled itself around me as my heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't need to be told something was terribly wrong to know that was the case. I was desperate to find out what was wrong with Dad, but after Daisy's earlier response, I knew better than to ask any more questions. The silence in the car was deafening as Bernice sped along the windy country lanes at breakneck speed like she was a competitor in the Monaco Grand Prix. She needed all her wits about her to negotiate the narrow tracks and hairpin bends in the pitch dark, or Dad wouldn't be the only one requiring a hospital bed. The last thing I wanted to do was divert her attention away from the road by having words with Daisy. I could feel the waves of hostility radiating off my twin, so I read the signs and kept my mouth shut. But my curiosity was killing me. We couldn't get to King's College soon enough for my liking. Chapter 3. Daisy. Mum looked haunted as she sat by the hospital bed with Dad's hand clasped in both of hers. His freckled face looked flushed, and an angry-looking rash covered both of his arms. Mum barely tore her eyes away from him when we walked into the ICU. Several moments passed before she realised Lily was standing next to me. She was so absorbed by the gravity of the situation that her response was underwhelming, even when Lily rushed forward and dropped down on the chair next to her. "Oh my God, what happened?" Lily asked, covering both of my parents' hands with hers. Before Mum had a chance to answer, a doctor came into the room and approached the end of the bed. "Are these your daughters?" she asked, glancing at Lily and me. "Yes," Mum replied in a tiny voice. "I'm a family friend," Bernice said to explain her presence in the room. I wasn't sure how her comment would go down, but either Mum didn't hear her or she chose to ignore her because it didn't provoke a reaction, which surprised me. They weren't each other's biggest fans. Bernice had been like a surrogate mum to Lily and me, but my mum and dad had no time for her. I was surprised Mum was being so reasonable, but it didn't last. "We've got the results of the lumbar puncture, and I'm afraid it's confirmed what we feared. Desmond has meningitis," the doctor began. The word meningitis rattled around in my brain. I didn't know much about the illness, but I was pretty sure it sometimes had deadly consequences. "Oh my God, that's serious, isn't it?" Mum's dark brown eyes glistened with tears as she trembled from head to toe. "I'm afraid so. It's a potentially fatal complication of his traumatic brain injury. The penetrating wounds Desmond suffered in the attack tore the protective tissues surrounding his brain, which allowed bacteria to enter and cause the infection," the doctor explained. Lily turned away from Dad in slow motion. I felt the weight of her stare as her glare settled on me, and she fixed me with a black look. She'd obviously put two and two together and realised I knew more than I was letting on. A feeling of dread swirled inside me. But then Lily turned her attention away from me and looked up into the doctor's face as she concentrated on what she was saying. "We've already started Desmond on intravenous antibiotics to help fight the infection, and will also treat him with corticosteroids to reduce the inflammation and swelling. But the next 24 hours will be critical. We don't know if he'll respond to the treatment." The doctor had a comforting bedside manner. Her voice was gentle and oozed sympathy. It was hard enough for me to take in the enormity of the situation. I couldn't even begin to imagine the turmoil Lily was feeling. Up until a few hours ago, she'd been oblivious to the danger Dad was in, but it was too late to regret my decision. I pushed the guilt from my head so that I could try to decipher exactly what the latest development in Dad's fight for life meant for our family. "Do you have any questions?" the doctor asked. "No," Mum said, fighting back her tears. The minute the doctor left the room, the atmosphere changed. Mum unravelled herself from Lily's grasp and got to her feet. She looked daggers at me before she walked over to where I was standing. "So nice of you to finally show your face. I'm disgusted with you. What could be so important that it kept you away from your dad's hospital bed?" Mum seethed. "I would have thought that was obvious," I fired back, my tongue getting the better of me. Emotions were running high, so I should have known my rudeness would go down like a slab of meat at a vegan dinner party. "Don't you dare use that tone with me," Mum replied, acid coating her words. "You wanted me to find Lily, didn't you? So that's what I've been doing. This might come as a huge surprise to you, but unfortunately, I can't split myself in half and be in two places at once." My response was intentionally abrupt, sarcastic. I knew I wasn't being very diplomatic, but I couldn't help myself. My temper had spiked, so the words galloped out of my mouth before I could stop them. "Don't you dare try and talk your way out of this. You haven't got a leg to stand on. I find it very hard to believe that you've been tied up every minute of every day since you left me here to deal with this on my own. There's no excuse for the way you've behaved." Mum's eyes were blazing. "This isn't getting you anywhere. Why don't you both take a step back?" Bernice suggested, holding her hands up in front of her in an attempt to calm the situation. But her stint as a peacemaker was short-lived when Mum tore into her with both barrels loaded. "Why don't you mind your own fucking business?" Mum spat the words out like they were burning the inside of her mouth. Bernice was no shrinking violet, but she had the good grace not to react. "You shouldn't even be in here. In case you hadn't noticed, my husband's gravely ill, so he doesn't need all and sundry spreading their germs around him." I felt my mouth drop open. The way Mum was carrying on, anyone would think Bernice had crawled out of a gutter. Bernice slipped her arm around my waist, so I turned my face towards hers. "I'll be outside if you need me, darling," she said. Her voice was soothing, oozing empathy. I could feel my bottom lip begin to tremble in response. I didn't usually cry at the drop of a hat. That was Lily's department. But I appreciated her show of support more than words could say. "Thank you," I mouthed, not trusting myself to speak. Bernice gave me a slight squeeze. Then she flashed Lily a half smile before she turned on her high heels and walked towards the door with her head held high and her long dark brown ponytail swishing behind her. Even though Mum had basically told Bernice to sling her rook, she seemed surprised by her departure. I should have known Mum wouldn't be able to help herself. She always had to have the last word. "Don't bother waiting. My girls don't need you," Mum said to Bernice's retreating back. Bernice didn't lower herself to reply, which was the best thing she could have done, because her silence seemed to rile Mum up more than any words she could have uttered. There was nothing more frustrating than being blanked, was there? It was strange, but almost as soon as the door closed behind Bernice, the fight seemed to seep out of Mum. I let out a deep breath as I tried to slow my racing heartbeat. Bernice was right. This was neither the time nor the place to get into a slanging match. "Is somebody going to tell me what's been going on?" Lily asked once we were alone. Warren Jenkins broke into the house and attacked Dad with a screwdriver. He forced it into his ear canal over and over again, which left him with a brain injury. "He's been in a coma ever since," I said. When I saw Lily's shock and her tears start to fall, I cast my eyes down on the floor. Guilt gnawed away at me like termites in a piece of rotting wood. It was hollowing out my insides, making me feel sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lily's tear-stained face was pained. It was a judgment call. I knew I'd been deceitful, but I thought I'd done the right thing by keeping the news from her. I was wrong, so wrong. If Dad didn't pull through, she was never going to forgive me, so I could kiss goodbye the opportunity to rebuild our relationship and put things right between us. "Is that the best excuse you can come up with?" Lily asked, as her expression darkened. "That decision stopped me from spending time with Dad." I felt bad enough, without her making me feel 10 times worse. "I did it for your own good. You needed time to heal. Knowing Dad was at death's door would have been too much for you to handle. You were too fragile, too emotional." "I can't believe you lied to me," Lily wailed. "I didn't lie to you. I just didn't mention that Dad was sick. Warren Jenkins still poses a massive threat to us. He's bound to be sniffing around, waiting to see if Dad pulls through. Mum and I witnessed what he did. I didn't want to put you at risk by bringing you here to the hospital." I'd honestly thought what Lily didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Big mistake. "I don't care about Warren. All I care about is that my dad is in ICU fighting for his life." Dad's machine let out an unusual sequence of beeps, cutting her off mid-flow. Mum rushed back to take up position next to him. I pulled up a chair on the opposite side of the bed and plonked myself down. My eyelids were growing heavy. I was exhausted from the lack of sleep, but we were in for a long night. There'd be no shirking my responsibilities this time. Much as I hated being in a hospital setting, I had to do the right thing and stay with my mum and sister so that we could put on a united front and will Dad to fight the infection with everything he had left to give. Hard as it was going to be, I had to bitterly resist the urge to run away. The sounds, the smells, the noises bothered me. I found all of them equally disturbing, unsettling. I had to suck it up and get on with it. While we waited, my thoughts turned to Mackenzie. He was never out of them for long. I'd only known him a short while, and much as I hated to admit it, he'd already stolen my heart. Days had passed since I'd last heard from him. Worry had wrapped itself around me like a creeping vine. I didn't want to think the worst, but if he was alive, why hadn't he contacted me? How long did it take to send a text and tell me he was okay? Samson owned Eden's, the club I used to sing at. When I'd asked him yesterday what he'd done with Mackenzie, Samson had insisted he was dead. I thought he'd just said that to upset me, so I'd been determined not to believe him. But maybe he'd been telling the truth for once. I'd been clinging to the hope that Mackenzie was just lying low, waiting for the dust to settle, that he'd resurface when the time was right. He'd done a disappearing act before, hadn't he? He was an expert at dropping off the radar. But my faith in that theory was diminishing with every day that passed. The weight of all this doom and gloom was crushing my fighting spirit.
Chapter 4. Samson. I woke with a start, then glanced at my watch. It was 4:45 in the morning. What the fuck was going on? It was unheard of for me to get up before lunchtime. This was the second night in a row I had trouble sleeping. Bernice Allen, the widow of my arch-enemy Roscoe Allen, had taken it upon herself to barge into my house yesterday and shoot me with a full metal jacket in an attempt to get even for me executing her hubby. The injuries she'd caused made it impossible for me to get comfortable. It had taken me ages to drop off. I'd been tossing and turning for hours. Every time I moved, shooting pains ripped through my insides and out the top of my arse. Bernice was going to die for what she'd done to me and my hired muscle, Gary. The poor bastard had more lead pumped into him in his final days, thanks to Bernice and her gammy-eyed husband. They'd been using him as target practice. But his luck had run out when he made the ultimate sacrifice and dived in front of me to protect me from the 9mm FMJ Bernice fired from a concealed pistol. The bullet killed Gary, entering his chest and exiting his back, then went into my gut and came out the top of my rump. I thought I was a goner too when I hit the deck and smashed my head off the marble floor, knocking myself unconscious. Gary landed on top of me, so when I came round, I had barely any air left in my body. His 20-stone bulk had forced most of the oxygen out of my lungs. It took a monumental effort on my part to find the strength to push the fat bastard off me. Nobody wanted to find themselves pinned to the ground by a corpse. Now I knew what hookers complained about when fat fuckers popped their clogs doing the deed while the girl was flat on her back. Talking about going above and beyond the job description. What a way to make a living. If Gary hadn't sprung into action when he did, I'd be the one who was 6 feet under. I'd heard people say when they had a near-death experience, it made them take stock of their life, change their outlook. I wasn't about to find religion or inner peace or become more tolerant and less interested in material possessions. And I certainly wasn't going to get all nostalgic and start ticking things off my bucket list in case my time ran out. I only had one thing on my mind, and that was to get even with the bitch who was putting me through hell. But that would have to wait until later. I needed to get some kip. As I tried to find a position that wasn't excruciatingly painful, and unpleasant thoughts suddenly burrowed its way into my brain. I'd been so preoccupied with the ache in my guts and throbbing arse cheek that I'd forgotten all about Mackenzie's decomposing corpse rotting away in my dungeon. Fuck. I'd have to get one of my guys round to clear up the mess before it stank my sprawling mansion out. My housekeeper was a very discreet woman who valued her job and knew the importance of not saying or hearing anything, but even she had limitations. She prided herself on keeping my place spick and span and was very particular, which ticked all the boxes of hired help if you ask me. She followed my instructions to the letter and did everything just how I liked it. If a putrefying honk suddenly started permeating its way through the structure of my gaff, she was bound to notice. Even if she didn't ask awkward questions, a stench like that travelled. I couldn't risk a nosy neighbour getting wind of it. If they stuck their beak in, I could end up with the old Bill sniffing round, literally. Choosing the right man for the job would be a massive ball ache, like I needed anything else going on below trouser level at this moment in time. I'd lost 4 members of staff in a matter of days. I supposed I could outsource the job, but I preferred to keep issues of a delicate nature like this in-house where possible. Whoever I chose would need to have cast-iron stomachs. Not only did they have Mackenzie's rotting remains to deal with, his piss and shit was splattered all over my porcelain tiles. It was going to be ripe in my torture chamber. There was no two ways about that. As I mulled over the options, Hamish and his younger brother Angus sprung to mind. They were 2 big Scottish lumps who looked like the contestants in a caber tossing at the Highland Games. They'd both done time, which was win-win as far as I was concerned. Prison provided a great education. Cons were banged up for one offence, but learned how to turn their hands to many other things while they were doing a stretch in the company of other lags. The brothers Grimm hadn't been on my payroll long on account of them being banged up, but I reckon they'd fit the bill. I couldn't imagine either of them would shy away from a bit of rubbish removal. There was only one way to find out. Hamish, I've got a job for you and Angus. Can you come over to the house ASAP? Yes, he replied in a broad Scottish accent. I didn't apologise for calling him at an unearthly hour of the morning. If he was bothered that he'd been rudely awakened, he didn't express it. But then again, Hamish was a man of few words, which was just as well because I couldn't understand what the fuck he was saying most of the time. The brothers had grown up on a deprived council estate in Paisley and seen a lot of hardship in their short lives. They were dream employees as far as I was concerned. When people were desperate for money, they'd pretty much agree to do anything. Some gentle knocking on my bedroom door refocused my attention. "Come in," I said. "I'm sorry to disturb you so early, Mr. Fox, but there are two gentlemen at the front gate asking to see you," my housekeeper said a short while later when she poked her head around the door. She seemed surprised to find me awake. She started work at 5 a.m, but our paths wouldn't usually cross until late afternoon. Her assessment of the brothers brought a smile to my face. I wasn't sure I'd describe the Desperate Dan lookalikes as gentlemen. "Hamish and Angus?" I asked, just to be on the safe side. You couldn't be too careful these days. The last time I had unexpected guests, I let a killer into my house. It beggared belief that Bernice had had the balls to waltz into my property and blow a hole in Gary while trying to get to me. "Yes," my housekeeper nodded. "Tell them to park their van round the back of the house and show them into my study, please," I replied. "And stay with them until I get there. I don't want them nicking anything." It was going to take me a while to waddle from my bedroom at the back of the mansion to my office in the East Wing. But I needed to show the guys how to access the dungeon in the basement, which was strictly off limits to everyone apart from my trusted close circle. Hamish and Angus hadn't previously been in that coveted position. But this seemed like as good a time as ever to elevate their status. I always found it difficult to take the leap of faith and allow somebody into the inner sanctum, but sometimes circumstances forced my hand. As soon as I walked into my office, my housekeeper made herself scarce, without me even having to dismiss her. "Thanks for coming so quickly. I have a clean-up job that needs your immediate attention," I said, once we were alone in the room. "What do you want done with that?" Hamish asked. "That's your call, but make sure you leave no trace of it behind," I replied. I didn't give a fuck about the technicalities. I just wanted Mackenzie out of my house. I hobbled over to the far side of the room and pressed my forefinger on the sensor so that it could read my print. A second later, the door unlocked. "The rubbish is down there, but I don't want you to bring it through the house. There's a separate entrance that leads into the grounds. Let me know when you're about to leave, and I'll show you the way out." "Did you park round the back of the house?" "Yes," Hamish replied. "Good. Everything you'll need is in the cupboard down there." Hamish and Angus didn't bat an eyelid as they stepped past me and started to walk down the stairs. Rather them than me, I thought as I watched them go. Expecting to be in for a long wait, I limped over to my drinks cabinet and poured myself half a tumbler of single malt, before carefully settling into my office chair. Resting most of my weight on my good arse cheek, I was only halfway through the measure when Hamish appeared in the doorway. "Angus is finishing off the floor. Was it the mop and bucket you wanted us to dispose of?" His accent was so strong for a minute I thought I'd misheard the question. "Come again?" "The rubbish you were talking about. Was it the mop and bucket?" Hamish reiterated. A red mist descended in record time, and if I hadn't been quick to swallow the expensive whiskey I'd been savouring, I'd have spat it all over the desk. Did the big lummox have shit for brains? "What the fuck are you talking about, you dopey bastard?" Hamish might have been the size of a house, but when something riled me up, I had the strength of 10 men. "You said you wanted us to take the rubbish out the back entrance. Was it just the mop and bucket?" Was this guy for real? Was there nothing going on inside his dome? Were all his brain cells out to lunch? More likely on the piss. I'd heard the brothers were partial to a bevy or 12. What they did in their spare time didn't concern me as long as it didn't affect their performance at work. But the booze must have addled the contents of their nuts. I hadn't anticipated they'd be incapable of following simple instructions. Yes, that's right. Dispose of the cleaning equipment, but leave the rotting carcass where it is. Hamish stared at me, slack-jawed, and I shook my head in disbelief. Then I put the crystal tumbler down on the desk so that I could clench and unclench my fists. I didn't hide my actions. I wanted Hamish to know how close he was to receiving a knuckle sandwich. He seemed unperturbed by the threat. He was preoccupied with mulling over what I'd just said and stared at me with a look of confusion on his face. Carcass! What carcass? My mouth dropped open as I processed his reply. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When Hamish had stuck his big ugly mug around my office door, I hadn't realised news that warranted trashing the place was about to be delivered. I only just managed to resist the urge to tip over the desk because I was in such a hurry to see if Mackenzie had done her disappearing act. I shoved my chair back and got to my feet. A stab of pain ripped through my insides as I bore my weight. But I gritted my teeth and pushed through the agony. Get out of my way, I snapped when I reached where Hamish was lurking in the open doorway. Every step sent red-hot waves crashing through my body. The descent into my dungeon was excruciating, but necessary. My nostrils twitched as I inched closer. I didn't want to inhale too deeply, but there didn't appear to be even the faintest honk of eau de toilette. A sweet-smelling floor cleaner had been replaced by the stink of Mackenzie's crap. Angus had done an excellent job eradicating every trace of the piss and shit from my porcelain floor. I was delighted to see it was no longer battle-scarred. I'd thought I was going to blow a gasket when Mackenzie Cartwright dropped his load all over my white tiles, after I'd sent a series of electric shocks through his bollocks. What a selfish bastard. My eyes fixed on the chair equipped with leg and wrist straps where Mackenzie had been slumped the last time I'd been in this room. It was empty. How could that be? I was sure he was dead. Nobody could have survived what I put him through. But he must have. Either that or a miracle had occurred, and he'd been resurrected like Lazarus. I wasn't a big believer in the power of the man upstairs, so I dismissed that theory as soon as it entered my brain. It was much more likely that he'd tricked me by playing possum. Mackenzie was vermin, and everyone knew they were almost impossible to eradicate. Thanks to Bernice distracting the operation before it was fully completed, it slipped through the net again. If she hadn't darkened my doorstep, I'd have realised he still had breath in his body. Somehow, that fucking woman had a lot to answer for. When I caught up with her, she'd wish she'd never crossed paths with me. I was going to make her suffer. Make her death long and painful. I couldn't believe Mackenzie managed to escape from my clutches. I'd well and truly had him cornered, but he was a slippery bastard. His time would come. And when his moment of reckoning finally arrived, I'd make him beg for mercy before I finished him off once and for all. Chapter 5. Mackenzie. I couldn't believe my luck when I came out to find myself alone in the dungeon. My last memory had been of Samson flicking the switch on a box that had wires running from it to a couple of metal crocodile clips attached to my gonads. The pain from the electric shock hit me in agonising waves. I'd never felt anything like it. It was off the scale. Watching me writhing in agony made Samson grin with delight. He turned the lever over and over again. Then everything went black. As I went to stand up, my trainer slipped on the floor. The legs of the chair were surrounded by crap. A vague memory stirred at the back of my mind. In my hurry to escape, I'd forgotten I'd lost control of my bladder and bowels. Samson was so particular about everything, he'd have been disgusted at the violation, which would have brought a smile to my face if I hadn't been in so much pain. My eyes scanned the scene. I'd done a real number on my old boss's pristine tiles, but I didn't have time to gloat. I needed to get as far away from here as possible before Samson and Gary came back and finished the job. I wasn't sure why Gary had opened the chair's straps, but I knew I had to take full advantage of the position I'd found myself in. I heaved myself out of the seat using my good hand and held on to one of the armrests as I pulled my boxers and jeans up with 2 fingers of my bandaged hand. I was having the week from hell. In the early hours of Tuesday morning, Arben Hassani, the Albanian drug lord, and 2 of his guys had broken into the old mill house while I was sound asleep. They'd come to issue me a warning, and I was dragged out of bed and frog-marched into the kitchen. One of the guys forced my palm onto the glowing red ceramic hob. My flesh had stuck to the hot plate like steak on a griddle. Arben had called it a taster punishment for paying with counterfeit notes for the cocaine he'd supplied. The notes were genuine. I'd stake my life on that. He'd given me a week to come up with 100 grand, or he was going to let his guys get stuck into me. I shuddered at the memory, then pushed it back out of my mind. I had to focus on my current predicament and try to navigate my way through the piss and shit without injuring myself further. It stank to high heaven. I was glad I wasn't the mug having to clean it up. I'm pretty sure the unenviable task would fall to Gary. There was no way Samson would get his hands dirty. He'd burn the house to the ground before donning a pair of marigolds and setting to work with a bottle of bleach. My heart was pounding as I made my way to the door. My progress was slow. I was moving at a snail's pace. A combination of unsteady feet on a hazardous surface and a barely functioning body hindered my bid for freedom. When I finally got to the back entrance, I glanced over my shoulder to check the coast was clear. I had visions of Gary grabbing me by the scruff of the neck and pulling me back to the chair, but he was nowhere to be seen. I pushed down on the bar, half expecting the door to be locked, but it swung open, and I stumbled out into the darkness. Fresh air had never tasted so good. I gulped lungful after lungful. But when the ultra-bright light on the wall above flashed on, illuminating a patch of ground in front of me, I had to flatten myself against the edge of the house. For my sake, I hope nobody inside had noticed that the part of the garden had suddenly lit up. I was in no condition to make a run for it. Samson's house was set in a sprawling landscaped grounds. It would take every ounce of strength I had left within me to stagger to the main road. I'd have to take the long way round and hug the perimeter to avoid the security lights and cameras. Samson had spared no expense when it came to protecting his mansion, so I'd have to keep my wits about me and tread carefully to avoid triggering any of the devices. I'd only been limping for a very short time when I spotted headlights on the driveway in the distance. My heartbeat started galloping in my chest when I realised they were coming towards me. I dropped down behind a large shrub and watched with my pulse pounding in my ears as a white transit van crept along the gravel. It was travelling so slowly that time seemed to stand still. I saw 2 dark-haired guys inside as it drew level with me. It was difficult to tell from the distance I was at, but I was almost sure I didn't recognise either of them. But Samson must have known them. Otherwise, they'd never have been granted access to his fortress. I was scared to breathe in case I gave myself away. so I held my breath until the van passed me. What was wrong with me? It wasn't though the occupants were close enough to be able to hear me. But I did it all the same. My ears pricked up when the engine stopped. Then, 2 doors opened and closed. The sound of footsteps on gravel rang out in the darkness, echoey, threatening. My senses were heightened. When it dawned on me that they were coming this way, my pulse sped up again. The men had parked their van at the back of Sampson's house, close to where I'd been tortured. But they were heading back down the driveway. I let out a huge sigh of relief when they veered off onto a different path and approached the front door. A few seconds later, they disappeared inside. I stayed in my hiding place long after they'd gone. I was frozen with fear, terrified to move a muscle. It was cold and damp in the bushes. My short-sleeved t-shirt wasn't generating any heat. So I rubbed at the goose-pimpled skin on my arms and tried to warm myself up. It made no difference. My teeth were beginning to chatter. I'd probably end up with hypothermia if I didn't keep moving. Besides that, Sampson might realise any minute I'd shot through. And the first thing he was likely to do was search the grounds. An involuntary shiver ran down my spine, giving me the incentive to pull myself off the muddy floor. Hard as it was going to be, I had to push on. Every inch of the ground I covered was torture. I was weak, battered and bruised. But it wasn't just my body letting me down, my brain was scrambled. I was finding it hard to concentrate. On more than one occasion, I had to stop myself from curling in a ball and hiding in the shrubs again to have some much-needed rest. But desperation kept me edging closer to the finish line. I was nearly delirious by the time I reached Sutton Lane. The streetlights seemed to be winking a silent encouragement to me as I drew closer. The sense of freedom made me feel lightheaded. I'd come so close to losing my life. I shoved my numb, unbandaged hand into all the pockets of my jeans, searching for my mobile. But Sampson must have emptied them when I passed out. My wallet and cash were missing too. So much for my plan to go and buy a lottery ticket and then call an Uber. There was no way I could walk home from here. Even if I'd been fighting fit, it would take at least an hour and a half. In my present condition, I'd have to triple the time. I wasn't strong enough to endure grueling exercise like that. My only hope was to try and blag a free ride on the train. Getting to the station was going to be an uphill battle. My resolve was slipping as I plodded along the empty pavements. I wasn't sure what time it was. It was still dark, but it was the depths of winter, so it could be early morning or evening. There was no way of knowing. All this effort could be in vain. I was breathing out of my arsehole by the time I reached Clapham Junction. My lips lifted into a hint of a smile when I saw the station was open. Thank fuck for that. I walked into the forecourt and glanced up at the digital display. It was 7 a.m, so it was morning.